We've all seen UI libraries like Material UI, Bootstrap, Tailwind UI, ShadCN UI, and many, many more. And I've covered most of these on the channel at some point. But there's something they all have in common. They're all 2D, as in they all render in traditional HTML in your browser. What if they were 3D though? What would a 3D UI kit in the browser look like? Would it include things like Flexbox? Would it include things like buttons? And how would you even consume that and use it? Would you be able to use React? How would this all come together? I want to show you some really cool things. This is a demo of a made-up post with activities. And as you see, as we scroll around, there's little 3D things inside as well as outside. And we can click it, have this open up, turn on push notifications, mark as read. It is both a 3D environment and an interactive UI. It's both at once. And it is really interesting how this all comes together, because this isn't just some one-off somebody made as a demo. This is actually part of a new UI library being built by the Poimandres crew. It is a fully responsive UI kit that is built to work in both 2D and 3D environments. And the ways they do that is nuts. This example they gave here as a starting point is pretty damn cool. They have this dashboard that's meant to look like your traditional SaaS money dashboard. And you could scroll around, but then he changes the code here to add a water effect, because this all exists within a canvas. This content, all the things here, aren't part of your usual DOM. These are all being rendered in a canvas, which could be 2D, 3D, 4D, whatever the hell you want. All GPU accelerated and fully controlled by you as the developer, rasterizing it. Obviously, this has a ton of potential issues with everything from accessibility to performance to somebody in chat mentioning that as soon as they opened up the website, their fan on their MacBook started spinning up immediately. And in the end, this is kind of how Flutter for Web works. But what's very exciting is when you actually need this for stuff, like you're building an interactive 3D environment, there's a lot of potential here. And I want to explore that potential, what it looks like, how we got here, and what you can use this new 3D UI kit for, because it is so cool. And in a future where more and more things go 3D, especially with stuff like the Vision Pro out, this might not just be optional in the future. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. Like, how crazy is that you can have different background materials inside of your UI? Oh, it's going to be so cool. Maybe this needs more context. This is meant to bring UI to where there is none. 3JS, WebGL, WebGPU, AR, VR games, etc. It isn't strictly meant to replace websites, though perhaps it could break some norms. Accessibility and SEO, quite possibly, yes. Yeah, these are not what this is built for. If your top priorities are having a very accessible website that runs on every device and can be indexed by Google well, you're not in the canvas at all. But if your goal is to have a crazy interactive canvas experience and then you realize you need a button or a toggle, what they're building here is very promising. That said, they are also building a bunch of accessibility tools for React 3 Fiber, which is an important piece of glue that holds this all together. So it's not like it can't be done and made accessible. It's just more work, and they've been working hard to make this all come together. So what even is this UI kit? We have a GitHub. It already has almost 2,000 stars, which is really cool considering how new this project is. The UI kit is built for performant 3D user interfaces using 3JS as well as React 3 Fiber and Yoga, with support for nested scrolling, buttons, inputs, dropdowns, tabs, checkboxes, and more. If you're not familiar with Yoga, you're probably not much of a React Native dev. Yoga was built by Facebook as part of the React Native project in order to simulate certain browser behaviors that we were used to. The big thing that people use Yoga for is Flex, the ability to do something that's like a Flexbox, but have it work on iOS as well as Android, as well as in like Canvas in the browser and all these other places. It's like an embeddable, performant math box that does all of the work necessary to implement some of these things that we're used to from the browser. So Yoga is almost like a third-party DIY Flexbox solution. Yeah, they even call it that. It's an embeddable and performant Flexbox layout engine with bindings for multiple targets. Well, they say multiple languages because it binds to iOS, Android, and a bunch of other cool things. What I'm excited for here is seeing how they make this work in the 3D world. With UIKit, they're using Yoga as well as React 3 Fiber and 3JS to allow you to build and also provide really high-end, fancy UIs, similar to what we'd expect from Shad UI or Material UI in 3D. Perfect for games, virtual reality stuff, cross reality, all the above, VR, AR, you know it, as well as any web-based spatial computing apps. This isn't for you to just replace your usual dashboards, but if you're building things in 3D, VR, AR, or games that are already in the canvas, this is a really compelling solution. And that's not just for people who are building like web games either. It's already somewhat common for companies like DICE, who makes Battlefield and Battlefront, to use React as a way to render UIs on top of the game, because React's a better rendering engine for UIs than anything they're building in their native game engines. React in games is already a thing. By providing a good UI kit on top, the future is getting brighter every day. say. If you think all websites looking the same is bad, go play 3 different games, especially from like the Xbox 360 era, and see how all of their interfaces couldn't be more different. Even things like which button was confirmed on PlayStation took us years to agree with, and there's still disagreement across different regions. The idea of standardized quality UI components is just a foreign concept to the gaming world, and seeing it come from the React world is actually quite exciting. So what does this look like? Here's a simple UI with 2 containers horizontally aligned, rendered in full screen. When the user hovers over a container, the container's opacity changes. You do that by rendering a canvas from React 3 Fiber, full screen, which is the full screen element coming from the uikit, and then 2 containers. One has the background red, one has the background color blue, and you have the hover behavior where the background opacity changes. And then you give them both flex rows, full screen has a flex direction, and it just works. Yeah, it's bun create v at latest. I will call this 3D flex. React, TypeScript, cool. I'm so sorry, phase, copy. I'll grab these. Bun, add, copy this. Back into our source main. Force that to stop complaining. And that should just work. Oh, yoga. Yoga. We'll play with it until it works. Vite config. So they said it's the TS config. I change those then? Maybe that'll be enough. Failed. Those callouts in the Vite config might just have been because of it being, monorepoed. So hopefully that was what was causing that. The fuck is this coming from? Retrieving B5X stateful inline icon, flag error, timeout, falling back. Fun. Let's take a look, see if there's anything else I'm missing in the root TS config. I'm just yanking their exact one. I hate deleting all the lint rules and shit that I like, but I just want this to work, and I will try whatever I have to for that. How are they bundling? They're bundling with Vite, so this is a minimal one. Hopefully we can just rip everything here and it will theoretically just work. I hate JavaScript sometimes, guys. Delete tsconfig.node.json because that is just going to cause issues. Hop back over here. Cool. I have now copied the exact config over. What the fuck is trying to... Why is this so obnoxious to set up? There's nothing here complex enough to be this annoying. I got rid of the error, but the content's still not fucking appearing. Oh, don't tell me this whole time so we didn't give the canvas a size. I hate all of you. How did not a single one of you tell me that we didn't have a size on the canvas? I'll be honest, these are the moments where I actually like doing my dev live because I would feel so stupid if I had just done this alone. But the fact that literally hundreds of you were hanging out here with me and not a single goddamn one of you, not one of you, said it was the size. I'm not trying to gaslight chat. I'm trying to express the gaslighting that I have felt that you guys not catching the mistake makes me feel better. The canvas doesn't have chat. You almost used the right word there. Cheers. I'm thankful I grabbed a beer before this one. Jesus Christ. So now we have 2 boxes that flex, and they flex to fill whatever space, even though they're being rendered in a canvas. This is kind of fucking magical because previously making things resize like this in the browser was only really doable in traditional DOM stuff. And the idea of having access to these primitives inside of the canvas is honestly amazing. I can just change flex direction to column. And now they're vertically stacked instead. I'd probably want to change the height to be 100 VH. And now 100% of the space is going to be taken up. These have padding that we applied of padding 100, gap 100. I can change this to be 10. And it's all flexing the same way you would expect a Flexbox to traditionally work inside of a canvas. That's the magic. A Flexbox in a canvas, the thing that you click the video for. But we're going to get way deeper and have way more fun with this. Let's hop back to the docs because there's a lot of good stuff in here. So we're just playing with this first example. Let's read the rest here. Pre-styled component kits. See where we're going now? We provide multiple kits containing themable pre-styled components. Inspired by ShadCN, you can use RCLI to install the source code of any component to your desired location with one command. For example, to add the button from the default kit, run npx uikit component add default button. I already ran this command when I was trying to debug things earlier, but because we did that, we should now have access to the button. If we take a look here, we have source, components, button, and here is our pile of code for 3D button. Let's try rendering it in our Flexbox. I'll put it at the bottom here. Import button. I'm just curious what it has by default on it. Not much. It's just a button there. Can I pass it children? It does not look like the button takes children, which is totally fine. There's plenty of other ways to interface with a button. We could read the docs, but it's much more fun to just do things here. Wait, according to this, it does take children. Let's take a look in the docs to see how they recommend actually using it. They have their core components and properties, and then the UI kits that have the actual theming and things like a button. And also, just like React Native, you can't render text as a child. You have to render it in a text element, which might sound tedious, but makes a ton of sense if you've been around in these worlds for long enough. Because there is no default just render text in this world. So here we're going to import text from React 3 UI kit. So this show dialog, I'm just going to say, click me. And now, if we did all of this right, we have a click me button. Ta-da! That was more annoying than it should be, but I'm also learning this new thing that is very, very early. So no crap to these guys, minus the obnoxious setup experience there. This is still in an incredible, really cool state that I'm excited to play with more. How do we actually get started here? Also, I love that they're calling out how inspired the default is on ShadCN as well as Appful, which is inspired by AVP. Really cool that you have these two options. This one that feels much more Apple-y and this one that feels much more Shad Vercelli. So how do we actually get started? Some familiarity with React 3.js and React 3 Fiber is recommended, which, yeah, you shouldn't use this if you're not already using those things some amount. So how do we get started? Build your first layout, take a look at their examples to see uikit in action, or learn more. We've already played a bit and it's stressed me out. Interesting, they have a Tailwind migration guide, but I want to see their examples because I've already seen some impressive stuff. This is the one that we started with. I want to see these others though. Let's take a look at the dashboard, the market, and Lucid. This is the dashboard made using those UI components. None of this is particularly interactive, but it's all built in the canvas. So that comes with a cost. Like we can't scroll and select text. Like I'm trying to select text and the page just slides. And when you inspect an element, you're just selecting the canvas. There is no DOM tree for us to traverse here in the browser, which feels really strange. And if we command F for things, not going to find it. It even says in Arc, sorry, I can't read this type of page. So that's the catch here, but it's indistinguishable from a real UI. So it's basically working the same way that something like Flutter does. The difference is this is actually giving you the canvas primitives so you can render it in 3D. If you had, let's say, an interactive part of your app and you just rendered an element and then let the canvas take over and then rendered a mini React 3 Fiber app inside, this would be great. I would not recommend doing what they're doing in this example of having your whole website mounted in a canvas. That has a ton of implications, a ton of issues, things like accessibility that we keep touching on. But if you have like one part of your experience or like a VR experience or just embedding this as a subsection of your existing app that is just one part that's meant to be really interactive in 3D, this can absolutely make sense. I'm not saying go rewrite your Shad UI apps with this. I'm saying if you want to do canvas 3D stuff and bring your React knowledge with you and bring the composability, interoperability, and all those awesome parts with you, this enables you to do that at a level that wasn't really possible before it. And the fact that we now have real UI libraries like this to do it with is just mind-blowing. The fact that you can have a truly 3D Flexbox is just like, whew, mind-blowing. Here's another deeper app that has different scroll behaviors, different sections that you would be able to go to if they had actually flushed them out. But it is, once again, just meant to be a demo with obviously all source code available. And one last one. This is actually a really good test, having a ton of images rendering at once and seeing that it still scrolls and runs fine. That's really cool to see. Oh, this is cool. They even left the feedback open in the corner here so you could see the impact for the GPU performance. That's really cool. Good shit. We should take a look at their section on pitfalls. Pitfalls to avoid when designing user interfaces with uikit. Async objects inside of a context can be problematic. Yeah, having a suspense inside of content breaks things. Having it outside of content where everything inside is suspended, that's fair. The content component measures its content when the component is created. If the content is loaded asynchronously, the measurement will be incorrect. To prevent this behavior, suspense boundaries must be placed correctly. They have a bunch of cool performance callouts of things that you would never think of, at least I wouldn't. Like having multiple font families can cause a lot of performance issues because each font family has to do another separate render pass. Like I would never have thought of that. So I guess everyone just using inter for everything has a potential win here, but the rest of us who use multiple fonts, be careful. I want to show you guys just how 3D this 3D is. We're going to do it by trying out the orbit controls bit here. I'm just going to rip this whole thing because I trust their code more than what I'm working with right now. So let's kill that, paste this, import. Where does orbit controls even come from? Oh, that comes from Dre. Dre is a phenomenal package, by the way. If you guys aren't familiar, it is a bunch of useful helpers for React 3 Fiber. That's not being anywhere near generous enough with how cool this is. Speaking of cool, wouldn't it be cool if GitHub would open? Anyways, Dre has crazy stuff like these insane lighting characteristics, perspective cameras, positional audio, all sorts of crazy helpers that are very, very useful when doing 3D shit. Like, just look at all of this stuff, like matching cubes, an SVG renderer, like a dozen different shaders, probably more than that. So much useful shit. In this case, we're going to be playing with 3D, so we're going to want to orbit a bit. So let's quickly add React 3 Dre. Now that this is added, I should be able to import orbit controls from Dre. Nice. And the root as well, which comes from the uikit. Looks like they're handling the sizing in the root div, which I can do as well. So we're going to go over to the index.html and change this div accordingly. Delete all the things we're no longer using. And if we did this all right, then we should be able to bun dev, hop over, and now we can move this around in 3D. That's so cool. Let's make this a little more interesting because the sizing is a bit silly. Maybe we'll change the margin to like 10. Cool. Now we have our two boxes in a 3D environment. You have to admit, that's pretty cool that we literally just add the orbit controls component and now this environment is 3D and we can play with it however we want. Let's do 25 for the size. I'm just curious how that handles things. That's so cool. That's so cool. I'm sorry, I'm just geeking out about this, but this stuff's mind-blowing. It was so hard to make things like this before, and now it's literally just React components. Like, I could put state in here and have it when you click something that it disappears and reappears. It's so easy to set this shit up now, and it was never, ever like this before. Suspending image is a really useful thing to have built in too. It doesn't use React suspense, but it loads the image silently behind the scenes, which lets you load an image and still have a state that's showing with a loading ahead of time. They even have a portal that lets you render things in different places than you intend to initially. This is all so cool. I'm pumped they have all of these things already included. And I don't think you guys understand how annoying it was to render SVGs in 3D before. Like, it was actually the most annoying thing in the world, and now it's just like free. I spent so much time trying to get SVGs to render inside of a 3D environment for an app like 4 years ago. Now it's just a component you mount. What the fuck? That's so cool. So if we go back to this default example, it's actually pretty easy to understand the code and see just how cool it is. I have that code pulled up here. We start with a canvas. It has the local clipping enabled flag, but more importantly, it has a camera positioned a specific way, far away back in the Z index with an FOV set as well. So you can actually change how zoomed in and out things are too. Really cool stuff. We wrap this with the defaults component, which I believe comes from the uikit. No, it's the theme.js, which is optional. It's part of how the theming is styled, but part of why the UI automatically looks almost exactly like poimandres. Well, specifically ShadCN. Then we have here an ambient light, which you notice isn't being imported. That's because this comes from React 3 Fiber, specifically 3JS and the canvas stuff, which means you can render a generic ambient light that fills everything, but also a spotlight that gives it a little more depth, similar to in here where I have one light behind me that's meant to fill the room, but then a light in front meant to focus in on me. You can actually configure your lights in here just as components the way you would any other component, which is so cool. The ambient light filling the room means it doesn't need a position, but the spotlight, since it needs a position, has to be given that is in a location. It has an angle, a place that it's pointing at, and you also have to say specifically that this one can cast shadows. We then have the root, which has the card page in it, which is the actual card that we're rendering. Then the full screen, which has the button with the source code and all that built in, some floating stuff, the environment that it's rendered within, and then rig, which I'm assuming just rigs everything together. But here's the card page where the actual interesting stuff exists. We have the use frame call, which is used to actually generate each frame. Specifically on every frame, it does whatever code you wrote here in a background thread, so it doesn't require traditional re-render. So here we are easing the translation for the, I'm assuming this is the card that slides in and out, the thing right here when you click where that slides in and out. That's what's using the use frame call here to actually do that moving. And in here, we have the container, which is the main thing that has both that piece sliding underneath and that main card. The mesh portal has a color background. That's that white background on that. And this has its own child in it, which is the, where is it in here? Physical? I'm assuming if I search for that in here, we'll find where it's actually defined. Oh, those are being imported from the components folder. So we go to components, simulation. you'll see we have the physical, and this is the elements being rendered inside that little card there. So that's just another component being mounted that has all of this crazy stuff inside of it. And since this exists inside of an element inside of your 3D UI kit, it all behaves the same way components would in a traditional web app, which is just so cool that you can mount like a mini 3D game inside of your 3D game. In fact, if you had something like the source code for the Mario Kart JS thing that I showed in the past, you could mount that whole app as a little thing inside of a card in here. That's so cool. The idea of just mounting someone else's game inside of your 3D environment, like there's potential here for this to be the future of like the old Flash portals we would browse through, where you could have a website that has all sorts of different 3D games in this 2D, 3D world. Just mind-blowing shit possible here. And all of the code reads just like any React code. It's so cool. I've been saying for a while that I'm desperately in need of the sequel to Flash. And I feel like when I look at things like this, we're closer than we've been in a very, very long time. This has been a wild ride. I did not expect to run into both the problems and the cool stuff that I saw here. I'm curious what you think. Is the future 3D? Should we expect more component libraries to show up and challenge the way we think about things? And is this a real competitor for the old days of Flash? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, here's all of my chatters complaining about me mentioning Flash. Peace, nerds.